Today, we become legends.
So the title of this video is an intentional mirror of a video I released a couple of months ago, as I want to talk about the changes we've seen since then and how my perspective has changed quite a bit from what I portrayed in that video. The main worry I have at the moment is the timeline. After playing a few alpha tests of Smite 2 now, I don't think the development of the game is going anywhere near fast enough to meet the targets set by Hi-Rez, which were 24/7 closed beta by the end of summer, so August 31st at the latest. That's basically 2 months away, so time for about 2 more alpha tests, and I just don't see the game being ready and in a good state by then based on the improvements between Alpha 1 and Alpha 2. A short summary of that video is that I did and still do believe that Smite 2 will eventually become a great game and a worthy sequel, but the development of the game was not going anywhere near fast enough for it to release in a good state before Smite 1 fades into irrelevance due to lack of updates this year and a clear shift towards developing Smite 2 over adding new content to Smite 1. I do still feel this way to a certain extent and still fundamentally believe this launch has been a bit rushed and Smite 2 should have been cooked for an extra year in the background while still focusing on Smite 1 and having SPL year 11, then announce Smite 2 at Worlds this year in a slightly more complete state. I know the team did it this way because they want feedback, but I still feel like 1 extra year in the oven to get it into a much more playable state would have provided much better feedback and would have avoided a lot of this negative PR that they've received for releasing the game in such a terrible and broken state. However, there's been a marked and noticeable shift in not only the pace of development for Smite 2, but the quality of updates we've received since I made that video. At the time, we just had the Alpha 2 test, which really brought nothing of note in terms of new content or changes to alleviate the concerns of the community. But since then, we've had Alpha 3, which was a good step forward and brought important things like combat blink as a relic option, the boring gold piles being replaced with a camp that is a little less boring, jungle camps dropping buffs at level 1, speed buff giving a jungle starter-like effect, and other buffs receiving good tweaks like mana regen being back on blue buff. Hecate launched in a much better state than her original design, and while she's not a groundbreaking release in my opinion, she is fun and a massive improvement over what we initially saw for her. Thanatos and Morrigan released in pretty good states as well, which alleviates some of the concern over how certain gods in Smite 2 felt awful compared to Smite 1. The game-wide CC adjustments and DR changes were a long time coming and a great change in my opinion. Alpha 3 was a good patch and I praised it at the time, but was still cautious, especially after Alpha 4 failed to deliver anything interesting and new. This could have just been one great patch among the sea of bad ones, or it could have been the turning point in the development of the game. And as you probably know from the title of the video, it seems the latter is much more likely. Closed Alpha 1, the 24/7 launch patch, was revealed not too long ago, and it was basically Alpha 3 on steroids, bringing a myriad of universally positive changes for Smite 2, alongside some more experimental changes that could work out really well or could crash and burn. Mordred was announced, and while we don't have official kit information on him yet, the closer look blog painting him as a hybrid int/strength god with some warrior and some assassin elements seems really cool. We'll have to see how he shapes up, but hopefully we've learned from Hecate's botched launch and they'll get him right this time. The CA1 Dev Insight show brought us new relic options in Shell and Aegis, a massive visual overhaul to make the game more colourful, stylized, and similar to Smite 1 in terms of graphics rather than the pseudo-realism they were going for beforehand. 2D card arts are being brought back in lieu of the terrible looking 3D render card arts. Starter items were brought back in the best way possible, taking up their own slots so it doesn't interfere with your regular 6-item build, and having level 20 upgrades, which is one of the best changes they ever made to Smite 1 in my opinion. Active items got limited to 3 per person, which I personally am not a huge fan of, but it likely won't impact most roles as you generally weren't building more than 3 actives outside of support anyway, and they now have a much easier way to read when they are ready in the form of their own icons next to your ability bar. 20 fan favorite and most bought items from Smite 1 were also brought back to give returning players a foothold into the new system of Smite 2, and have at least 2 or 3 familiar items in their build rather than needing to use all 6 completely new items, reducing the burden on learning the game for the first time. All gods will now only deal 1 damage type, which is another of the more experimental changes that wasn't universally well received, but did seem to have a generally more positive reception than negative. The new Ascension Pass system adds a reason to grind the game and a ton of innovation in terms of what cosmetics are offered. The mastery skins all look great in my opinion. The new trackers and badges are a ton of fun, as are the global emotes, plus the pricing on them seems reasonably fair at 450 diamonds if you count the refund it gives you. So many good changes are coming in this patch, and while the game is still far from ready to take the mantle from Smite 1 in my opinion, the pace at which they responded to community feedback and added new things in this update makes me a lot more optimistic that the direction of the game has completely shifted from where it was heading getting before. The pace is faster, which as I mentioned in my previous video is a key thing, but also the quality of updates and content is better. I wouldn't expect every update following this one to be anywhere near as big, but this really showcases a marked change in the direction of the game, and hopefully this can be a tailwind behind the game that gets more people interested and the devs more motivated to make these kind of big changes going forward. We've also seen Smite 1's player numbers level off a bit from the plummeting path they were on for most of this year. Granted, it has leveled off at near all-time lows, and the situation in Smite 1 with the lack of content is concerning, especially with Smite 2 still not really ready to take its place. But player counts have leveled off nonetheless, and the game is no longer bleeding players precipitously every month like it was for most of this year. Being near all-time lows sucks, but the game is being actively replaced at this time, so the fact that we're leveling off at around the same or even slightly higher numbers than towards the end of Season 4 is something slightly relieving. Of course, this is just a silver lining in a somewhat devastating tale of Smite 1's player numbers, and I and many others have seen the ramifications of the game losing over half its active players since January this year, with much more wacky matchmaking, long queue times, and for me personally, reduced interest in videos across the board. It's not a positive thing to have the player numbers this low, and I won't try to paint it that way, but I will say that we're in a much better spot now than we were a couple of months ago when I initially made that original video. How long can you get away with releasing very little content for Smite 1, having it bleed players down to levels not seen since 2019, having content creators and pros' livelihoods affected to the point that they might have to move on to different games or quit content creation entirely, losing a lot of community identity for the game in the process. Back then, player numbers were still bleeding and they have leveled off since, and also back then, Smite 2 was looking a very long way away from being ready to replace Smite 1 full time, and even when it was ready, there was a large portion of the community that simply didn't like the direction the game was going in. The CA1 24/7 patch has alleviated those concerns massively, not only with the change in general direction of the game to be a bit more like Smite 1 and keep some of those existing players that might not have jumped on it beforehand, but also just to show that the devs are listening and are working hard on making the game better at a rapid pace. Before this patch, development seemed very slow, despite the claims that they can work a lot faster on a fresh codebase in UE5 over a spaghetti mess in UE3. It seems the devs are getting more comfortable in the new engine now though, and this patch has rapidly accelerated the pace of new content and changes, and the outlook for Smite 2 to be ready to replace Smite 1 fairly soon is looking a lot brighter, which was the main issue I had when I made that original video. Smite 1 simply can't survive on maintenance mode forever with no new gods and very little new content, so the quicker they can get Smite 2 into a real 24/7 free-to-play ready state, the better. And CA1 has given me, and a lot of others from what I've seen, some hope that Smite 2 will be ready sooner rather than later. So in summary, Alpha 3 was a small but welcome step in the right direction, and Closed Alpha 1 was a huge step in the right direction, not only with the actual changes and content added, but in terms of changing the direction and perception of Smite 2, making me, and from what I've seen, many others, more hopeful for the future of the game than we've been in the last few months. Catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.